Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
My best friend and I have this tradition where we watch movies at his place every Friday night. We're both film buffs, and it's our way of unwinding after a long week of work and classes. That particular Friday started like any other. We'd just finished watching 3 back-to-back movies, including this really intense thriller that had us both on edge. It was past 12 a.m. when we decided to call it a night. My friend lives about 15 minutes away from my apartment, and I always walk home since the weather was nice and I couldn't afford a car yet. We stepped out into the cool night air, still discussing the plot twists from the last movie we'd watched. The street was pretty quiet, which was normal for that time of night in our neighborhood. We were walking on the sidewalk, just chatting about how predictable the ending was, when everything changed in an instant. This black sedan came screaming around the corner like something out of an action movie. The engine was roaring, and I could hear the tires screeching against the asphalt. Before either of us could react, the car mounted the curb and slammed right into us. The impact sent both of us flying. I remember the sharp, burning pain that shot through my left leg when I hit the ground. My friend was a few feet away from me, groaning and trying to push himself up. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. The driver's door opened with a loud creak, and out stepped this woman. She was clearly intoxicated, stumbling and swaying while she tried to walk. Her expensive-looking dress was wrinkled, and her hair was a mess. The smell of alcohol hit me even from where I was lying on the ground. She started yelling at us with slurred words, asking what was wrong with us kids for jumping in front of her car. She was pointing at us with a shaky finger, her words coming out all jumbled together. I shouted back that we were on the sidewalk and that she had driven into us. I tried to get up, but the pain in my leg was excruciating. It felt like someone was stabbing me with a hot knife every time I moved. My friend was sitting up now, holding his wrist and wincing. Karen then said she should sue us for damaging her car. She gestured wildly at her vehicle, which had a small dent in the front where it had hit us. Her eyes were bloodshot and unfocused, and she kept swaying back and forth like she might fall over. My friend told her that she had hit us while we were just walking and that she needed to call an ambulance. Even in this situation, he kept his voice steady, but I could see the anger in his eyes and the way his jaw was clenched tight. She started ranting about how we shouldn't tell her what to do and called us little brats. She said we probably didn't even have insurance and that everything was our fault. She kept rambling about how we were trying to scam her and how kids these days had no respect. Meanwhile, I was lying there in agony, and my friend was clearly hurt too. A couple who had been walking their dog witnessed the whole thing and came running over. They told us they saw everything and that she had driven right into us. They asked if we were okay, clearly concerned about our condition. Karen immediately started yelling at the witnesses too, telling them they didn't know what they were talking about. But when she realized more people were gathering and someone was calling the police, she suddenly got back in her car. Before speeding off, she shouted that this wasn't over and that we'd be hearing from her lawyer. She left us there bleeding on the sidewalk while the witnesses stayed with us until the ambulance arrived. They gave their contact information to the police officers who showed up. At the hospital, the doctors told me I had a broken leg that would need surgery. My friend got off a bit easier with some bad bruising and a sprained wrist, but we were both pretty shaken up. The police took our statements while we were getting treated, and they seemed confident they'd be able to track down the driver. 3 weeks later, while I was still hobbling around on crutches, both my friend and I received legal documents in the mail. This woman was actually suing us, claiming we had caused the accident and demanding money for the damage to her car. The paperwork said we had recklessly entered the roadway and caused her vehicle to sustain damages. When I called my friend to tell him about the papers, I asked if he could believe this woman was actually trying to blame us for what she did. He said it was insane and wondered how she could possibly think she'd get away with this. We were sitting in my apartment, staring at the legal papers like they might disappear if we looked at them hard enough. Neither of us had much money, and the thought of hiring a lawyer was terrifying. But we got lucky. My friend found this lawyer who specialized in cases like ours and was willing to work for free because he was so outraged by what was happening. The lawyer said he'd seen plenty of entitled people try to flip the script, but this was one of the worst cases he'd encountered. The months leading up to the court date were stressful. We had to give depositions, gather evidence, and deal with her lawyer's attempts to paint us as troublemakers. They tried to make a big deal about us being out late at night, suggesting we must have been up to no good. When the court date finally arrived, I was nervous but also angry. Here was this woman, dressed in an expensive suit, sitting across from us like she was the victim. Her lawyer was this slick guy who kept talking about how his client was a pillar of the community. Her lawyer told the judge that his client was simply driving home when we two young men suddenly appeared in front of her vehicle. He said she had no time to react and had suffered tremendous emotional distress from the incident. It was surreal listening to her version of events. According to her, we had deliberately jumped in front of her car as some kind of insurance scam. She said she hadn't been drinking and that the police report was wrong. Our lawyer was brilliant, though. He presented the evidence, starting with the police report that clearly showed she had been over the legal limit for alcohol. The witnesses testified about what they saw, describing how she had mounted the curb and hit us while we were walking on the sidewalk. One witness explained to the court that they saw the whole thing. They described how the car came around the corner way too fast and went right up onto the sidewalk. They emphasized that we boys never left the walkway. The judge listened to everything carefully, asking pointed questions that made it clear he wasn't buying her story. When our lawyer showed the medical records proving the extent of our injuries, you could see the judge's expression change. The judge told the woman that the evidence clearly showed she was intoxicated at the time of the incident and that she had struck us while we were lawfully using the sidewalk. He said her lawsuit was not only frivolous but bordered on harassment. Not only did we win the case, but the judge also ordered her to pay a substantial fine for filing a frivolous lawsuit. He said her attempt to blame the victims was particularly bad given the clear evidence of her fault. After the hearing, we decided to press charges against her for harassment and filing false claims. Our lawyer said it would send a message that this kind of behavior wouldn't be tolerated. When we left the courthouse, she was shouting at us that this wasn't fair and that we didn't understand what she'd been through. She was still trying to play the victim even after losing so badly. Her own lawyer looked embarrassed and was trying to get her to stop talking. 6 months later, we received a settlement check that covered all our medical bills and then some. She also had to do community service and attend alcohol awareness classes. My leg healed up fine, though I still get a little stiff when it rains. I'm 6'5" and weigh about 250 pounds, which seems to intimidate people even when I'm trying to be friendly. Plus, I have zero patience for the way some people treat service workers. My delivery job was perfect. I work alone driving pharmaceuticals from the central warehouse to about 15 different pharmacy locations for the same company. It's the one with the Blue Cross logo that you see everywhere. The pay is decent, the hours are flexible, and most importantly, I don't have to smile and pretend customers are always right. Over the past couple years, I've gotten close with a lot of the pharmacy technicians. I see them every day, and they're good people just trying to do their jobs. But man, some of the customers they have to deal with are absolutely terrible. I've watched people scream at these techs because their insurance got denied, or because their prescription isn't ready exactly when they want it, or because the price went up, like it's somehow the tech's fault that their insurance company is being difficult. I've always wanted to step in and say something, but I figured it wasn't my place. I'm just the delivery guy. But a few weeks before this incident happened, I started thinking about what I would say if I ever witnessed someone really going off on one of these techs. I had this whole speech planned out in my head about how these workers deserve basic respect and how yelling doesn't solve anything. Then one day it happened. I walked into the store around 2 in the afternoon, dragging my usual cart full of boxes behind me. I was wearing my standard uniform of cargo shorts and a company t-shirt. Nothing fancy, but it gets the job done. When I approached the pharmacy counter, I could hear someone yelling before I even got close. There was this woman absolutely screaming at one of the young techs. The tech couldn't have been more than 19 or 20 years old, and she was literally backing up against the wall trying to get away from this customer. The pharmacist was in the back giving someone a flu shot and couldn't come help right away. The woman was maybe 5'4" and had that stereotypical soccer mom look going on. Bleached blonde hair cut in one of those short bob styles, oversized pink glasses, and she was what you might politely call pleasantly plump. She was waving her hands around. Karen was screaming about how unacceptable everything was and how she'd been waiting for 20 minutes. The young tech kept apologizing and trying to explain that the prescription wasn't ready yet because the pharmacist had to verify it first. But Karen didn't want to hear about procedures or policies. She just kept yelling that she needed her medication right now. The poor tech looked like she was about to cry. That's when I decided I'd had enough of watching this happen. I walked right up to this woman, towering over her by more than a foot. I politely asked for her attention. She spun around so fast I thought she might give herself whiplash. She snapped at me, asking what I wanted, clearly annoyed that someone had interrupted her tantrum. She was looking straight at my chest at first, then slowly tilted her head back to look up at my face. I wasn't smiling, and I could see her attitude start to shift when she realized just how big I was compared to her. I asked her if she really wanted to be yelling at someone who could replace her insulin with sugar water. The pharmacy got dead quiet. You could have heard a pin drop. She asked me what I meant, her voice much quieter now. I could see the wheels turning in her head when what I said started to sink in. I told her to think about it. I explained that this pharmacy tech could, though I didn't think she would, replace one of her pills with potassium cyanide, and no one could ever trace it back to her. Karen went completely white. She opened and closed her mouth a few times like a fish out of water, then grabbed her purse and stormed out of the store without another word. The tech looked at me with this mixture of relief and amazement. She thanked me over and over, telling me that Karen had been coming in for months, treating everyone like garbage. I told her it was no problem, and that people like that needed to understand that pharmacy workers were human beings, not punching bags. I went ahead and made my delivery, getting all the necessary signatures and checking everything off my list. The pharmacist came out and thanked me too, saying he'd been dealing with that customer's attitude for way too long. I was just finishing up the paperwork when I heard a commotion near the front of the store. Sure enough, Karen was walking back in with the store manager in tow. She was pointing directly at me. Karen loudly said that I was the man who had threatened her. She demanded that the manager fire me immediately. The store manager looked confused when he walked over to us. He was a middle-aged guy who always seemed pretty reasonable when I dealt with him during deliveries. The manager apologized and asked what the problem was. Karen explained that I had threatened to poison her and that I had said the pharmacy staff could put cyanide in her medication. The manager told her he understood her concern but that he couldn't fire me. Karen demanded to know what he meant since I obviously worked there. The manager explained that I didn't actually work at the store. He told her I was a delivery driver for the pharmaceutical company and not his employee. Karen looked back and forth between the manager and me, clearly not knowing what to do next. She insisted that he call my supervisor then, because she wanted me reported. The manager told her she was welcome to call the pharmaceutical company herself if she wanted to file a complaint. But he also suggested that if she was having issues with the pharmacy staff, maybe they should talk about her behavior toward the employees. That was the final straw for Karen. She let out this frustrated shriek and stormed out of the store again, this time for good. The rest of that week, I was honestly expecting my boss to call and fire me. I kept checking my phone every few minutes, waiting for the inevitable conversation about professional behavior and company liability. But the call never came. The next day when I showed up for my regular delivery at that pharmacy, the entire staff was grinning at me. The tech from the day before came out with a plate of homemade brownies. She told me the brownies were from all of them. She said they'd been talking about what I did since yesterday and just wanted to say thank you. The pharmacist added that Karen had been terrorizing their staff for months. He explained that corporate kept telling them they had to be polite to all customers, even the abusive ones. I pointed out that since I wasn't their employee, I didn't have to follow those rules. We all had a good laugh about that. Our hotel is located right in the heart of downtown, and we used to be pretty busy with business travelers and tourists. I started working here fresh out of college, thinking it would be a temporary gig while I figured out what I really wanted to do. But honestly, I grew to love the hospitality industry. Sure, you deal with difficult people sometimes, but most guests are decent, and there's something satisfying about helping people have a good stay. When the pandemic hit, we had to lay off half our staff. Room service got completely eliminated, and housekeeping went from daily cleaning to request only. The state mandated reduced contact protocols, and we were just trying to survive as a business. I was lucky to keep my job, but it meant taking on way more responsibilities. I went from just handling check-ins and phone calls to basically being customer service, concierge, and problem solver all rolled into one. The thing is, we were really clear about these changes. When people made reservations, we explained everything. The website had big notices about the modified services. We even sent confirmation emails spelling it all out. Most guests understood and were pretty patient with us. But then there was this one guy. He'd stayed with us before, 3 times before the pandemic, and 7 times after it started. So he absolutely knew about our new policies. He was one of those guests who acted like he owned the place just because he'd been here a few times. On his first night during this stay, my phone rang around 8:30 p.m. The guest wanted to order a pizza to his room. I had to explain that we no longer offered room service because of the pandemic policies. I reminded him that this was clearly explained when he made his reservation and was also in his confirmation email. He seemed confused and asked what I meant about no room service, claiming every hotel has room service. I explained again about the health protocols and staffing changes and suggested he could use food delivery apps like Uber Eats instead. The guest seemed annoyed that he had to order his own food. Then he asked if one of us could just go pick up a pizza for him, saying he would pay extra. I had to decline, explaining that we couldn't leave the front desk unattended and our staff wasn't able to run personal errands for guests. He sighed and asked how to use this Uber thing. I spent the next 10 minutes walking him through downloading the app and placing an order. The whole time he kept making comments about how hotels used to provide real service. The next day he came walking down to the front desk around noon. I could tell he was angry before he even opened his mouth. He complained that his room wasn't cleaned while he was out. I asked if he had requested housekeeping, explaining that room cleaning was available by request only according to our current policies. He said he knew about the request policy but thought it was ridiculous. He insisted his room should be cleaned anyway because he was a repeat guest. I tried to stay understanding and explain that the policy applied to all guests equally. I told him if he wanted his room cleaned daily, he just needed to let us know each day and we'd be happy to arrange it. He called it the worst service he'd ever experienced and walked off. I made a note in his file to have housekeeping clean his room the next day without him having to ask. But apparently that wasn't enough. The second night the phone rang again around the same time. The guest wanted to order dinner to his room. I had to remind him that we didn't have room service and he would need to use a delivery app or visit nearby restaurants. He said this was absolutely unacceptable and that he was paying good money to stay here. I tried to explain that our room pricing had actually been reduced to reflect the modified services. He demanded to speak to my manager. I told him my manager wasn't available but could call him in the morning. He hung up on me. About 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and he came walking toward the front desk. This time he had his phone out and was clearly recording. He started yelling about how we called ourselves a hotel but wouldn't behave like one. I offered to help him with anything within our current service capabilities, but he kept going, saying he was going to sue us for allowing his kid to starve and not providing food. He threatened that we were all going to jail and would lose our jobs. He claimed he traveled all around the world and all hotels had food available 24/7. I stayed calm even though my heart was racing. Being recorded and threatened is never fun. I pointed out that if he traveled frequently, he probably knew that many hotels had modified their services due to the pandemic. Then I mentioned that his room was stocked with complimentary snacks and beverages in the minibar and dresser drawers. He stopped recording for a second and looked confused. He asked what snacks I was talking about. I explained that every room had chips, crackers, cookies, sodas, and water bottles that were complimentary and restocked daily. I told him he should find them in the small refrigerator and in the top drawer of the dresser. His face went red. Apparently, in all his stays with us, he'd never bothered to check what was actually in his room. He dismissed the snacks, saying they weren't real food and his kid needed real meals. I mentioned there was also a microwave in every room, and the convenience store across the street sold sandwiches, salads, and other ready-to-eat meals until midnight. He complained that he shouldn't have to leave the hotel to feed his family. I said I understood, but these were the current limitations we were operating under. I offered to help him find alternative lodging that might better suit his requirements if our accommodations didn't meet his needs. That seemed to deflate him a bit. The threat of having to pack up and find another hotel, probably with similar restrictions, made him realize he was being unreasonable. He said he was going to write a terrible review about this place. I told him that was his right and hoped the rest of his stay would be more pleasant. He walked back to the elevator, and I hoped that would be it. The next morning, my manager called me into the office. She said she got an interesting email the night before from a guest threatening to sue us for child endangerment because we didn't have room service. I told her I was planning to mention that situation and explained it was the guest in room 412. I went through the whole story, including how he'd stayed with us multiple times since the pandemic started and definitely knew our policies. My manager asked if I had mentioned the complimentary snacks. I said I did eventually, and he seemed surprised they existed. She told me she'd checked his reservation history and found that he complained about something every single time he stayed with us. Different things, but always something. She also mentioned that he'd never actually left a review, good or bad. I realized he was probably just threatening reviews to try to get free stuff, but then my manager told me something interesting. She had checked with housekeeping about how we've been automatically cleaning his room even though he complained about the request policy. She said housekeeping reported that his room was always completely trashed. Food containers everywhere, towels thrown around, even though he claimed his kid was starving. There was clear evidence of plenty of outside food deliveries. So he had figured out how to order food just fine and was just looking for things to complain about. My manager decided to have a conversation with him during checkout. I wasn't there for it, but she later told me what happened. She explained that while we valued all our guests, we also expected them to treat our staff with respect. She mentioned that we had security cameras in all public areas, including the front desk, and that threatening employees was something we took seriously. She also pointed out that since he was clearly familiar with our policies and had stayed with us 7 times during the pandemic, continuing to act surprised by our procedures seemed dishonest. The guest apparently tried to argue, but my manager cut him off. She said that while he was welcome to stay at our hotel in the future, any future incidents of threatening behavior towards staff would result in him being banned from the property. He checked out without another word. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.